I looked around desperately for some signs of difference. Maybe the bartender was just some kind of clone used in every lobby. I walked over to the bar. What did I drink last time I was here? A Jack Daniels. Are you ready for another one? I was tempted but wanted to keep my head clear. What did I ask you the last time? You wanted to know where the planes were going. What else? You wanted me to change the channel on the TV. Fuck, it was the same guy. And the bar stool I had moved was still under the TV. That plane ride was just a cruel hoax. My stomach was empty, so I asked, "You have anything to eat?" The bartender pulled out the bowl of peanuts. Nothing more substantial? I'm sorry, sir, but that's it. I begrudgingly took a handful of peanuts, walked over to a row of seats, and plunked myself down. I remembered I had some food in my pack, so I pulled out one of my precious croissants and ate that with my peanuts. I wanted to conserve my wine, so I washed it down with some water from my bottle. The lobby looked exactly the same. How the hell was I going to get out of here? I certainly had no desire to try another plane. That was an outright nightmare. Back the way I had come seemed like a dead end. Maybe the restroom? I got up and headed into the men's room. I saw nothing out of the ordinary, but took a moment to attempt cleaning the puke off my shirt. Upon exiting, I played a hunch and checked the women's room. It was exactly the same, except there was an air vent high up on the back wall. It looked to be big enough for me to squeeze into. So I retrieved the bar stool from under the TV. The barman did not protest. Back in the restroom, I stood up on the chair and used my sword to remove the screws holding the vent cover in place. It was slow and cumbersome, but finally the cover dropped to the floor with a bang. If the barman noticed, he did not react. I stashed my sword and pulled myself up into the vent. I turned on my flashlight and crawled forward. It was dusty as fuck in there, and I sneezed emphatically. Unfortunately, the noise must have disturbed some rats as they swarmed towards me. I bashed a few with my flashlight, accompanied by some light tingling in my arm. The rest got the message and scurried off. Up ahead, there was a vent heading off to the left. After a few feet, it pointed down. My flashlight revealed there was some machinery down there, but it was not running. I continued down the main vent. I came to a T-intersection. From my sense of direction, I surmised the left vent would take me away from where I had been previously, so I went that way. At the next intersection, I went right, hoping not to double back on myself. I wasn't too worried about getting lost, as there was a clear trail of disturbed dust behind me. At the next intersection, I could see a trace of light coming from the left, so I went that way. That direction ended at another vent cover. I tried looking through the slits in the vent, but couldn't see shit. I listened for a minute, but heard nothing. Finally, I maneuvered myself around and kicked the vent as hard as I could. It bent slightly, so I continued kicking until the bottom two screws popped out. That gave me enough room to slither out the opening and drop to the floor below. It was immediately apparent I was in another restroom. It was a men's room based on the two urinals. The stalls were unoccupied. I opened the door a crack and peeked out. Once again, I was surprised, but not sure what I expected at that point. I emerged into what appeared to be an old-time train station circa the 1930s, and it was deserted. There were two separate loading platforms, but no trains in evidence. There was a ticket booth on the far side, but it was locked up tight, and there were bars on the windows. I pulled out my trusty lockpicks. The door had a 4-pin lock, and I was able to spring it after a few tries, accompanied by only a light tingle. The booth was fairly empty, with only some scattered papers and a ticket dispenser. The papers were mostly train schedules. I checked the clock on the wall, but it was not moving. There was a wooden door that was unlocked. It led to a back office. The back office was nothing special, just a wooden desk and a couple high-backed chairs and more papers and tickets scattered about. There were a few paintings on the wall of the American Gothic era, but I noticed one of them was slightly askew. I lifted it off the wall to reveal a safe with a combination lock. No way I was going to crack it, so I looked around to see if someone had written it down. There was a locked drawer in the desk that I was able to pick with ease. I rifled through the papers but found nothing. A thorough search of the office turned up no clues. As I looked at the clock, I noticed it was stuck at 2:10 and 30 seconds. That couldn't possibly be it, but for the hell of it, I spun the dial a few times and tried right 2. Once past the 10, then stopped on left 10, then right 30. The fucking thing hit, and I turned the handle. I received a massive brain tingle and saw combinations spinning in my mind. I was a fucking genius! Inside the safe was a pair of leather gloves, some beef jerky, some scattered coins, and a ring with an emerald in the setting. I slid the ring onto the middle finger of my left hand right next to my wedding ring. Nothing felt different, but I was hopeful there was some type of benefit. I pocketed the coins, sampled a piece of jerky, and put the rest in my pack. The gloves fit like a, well, glove. Now it was time to determine my next route. I could always go back into the crawl space, but that didn't really appeal. Instead, I looked up and down the two train tracks. The one on the right was completely dark, but the left one had some square light fixtures built into the ceiling that were functioning. That seemed like the best bet. I pulled a coin out to flip in order to determine which way to go. But first, I examined the coin more closely. It was golden and about the size of a quarter, but thicker and heavier. The head side had the portrait of some sanctimonious-looking priest with a scepter. The tail side was the rear end of a ram. It was dated 1835, but had no other written information. A rare coin, a novelty item. Anyway, I decided that heads was right and tails was left. It came up heads. As I progressed along the tunnel, there was nothing to indicate any destination was imminent. After about a mile, I felt a rumble that could only mean one thing. In a panic, I flattened myself against the side of the tunnel, but it was apparent there was insufficient clearance for a person to avoid contact. There was no time for retreat, so I went with the only option available, laying flat on the tracks. I lifted my head enough to see the approaching headlight. Definitely a train, and it was getting close. I lowered my profile as much as humanly possible, with my head between two ties and turning my feet to the side. When it came, the vibration was so intense, I thought it would shake my teeth out of my head. The noise was even worse, I feared, for my eardrums. It seemed to go on forever, but couldn't have been more than a few seconds. What a rush! After it passed, I turned to look at the caboose, but could discern no detail. Should I go back to the station and see if I could board the train? After my experience with the plane flight, there was no guarantee a train ride would not be equally disastrous. Probably best to continue forward and see if there was any exit ahead. After another 15 minutes, I saw some movement up ahead. I approached cautiously until two red eyes coalesced. Oh fuck, not another werewolf, but this creature seemed lower to the ground, and what rushed me could be accurately described as a hellhound. Completely black with huge bat-like ears and a mouth full of twisted, wickedly sharp teeth. I instinctively blocked with my left hand as it leaped at my throat, and I pulled out my sword. It sunk its teeth into my arm, giving me a jolt of excruciating pain before I gutted the beast from breast to groin. It yelped and released me as it dropped to the ground, and I sliced its neck open to finish the job, giving me a gratifying tingle in my sword arm. No sooner did I examine the wound on my arm than I felt a tingling on my left ring finger. I pulled off my glove to see the emerald ring was glowing, and the jagged tooth marks on my arm began healing before my eyes. Sweet! So that was what the ring did, and just in time, a closer examination of the dead hellhound revealed it was hairless and had a long pointed tail. Creepy as hell. It must have come from somewhere, which indicated there must be an end to this tunnel. I persevered, now on full alert for any more canines. After another mile down the tracks, it appeared there was some light at the end of the tunnel. Fortunately, it was not an oncoming train. In fact, there were hints of green vegetation in the background. That was more like it. Perhaps I could finally escape this madness once I saw the lay of the land. I emerged into daylight. It was a forested wilderness under a bright sun. That made me wonder if I had finally escaped the underground catacombs once and for all. Surely there could be no sunlight underground. I was surrounded by thick woods, and I could see no paths or openings in the trees. They looked to be pines, and stretched as far as the eye could see. The tracks were on a raised channel through the trees, so that seemed like my best bet. The line went on like that for several miles. At least if another train came along, there was room to avoid it in the trees. After a couple hours of hiking, I stopped to take a break under the pine trees. That turned out to be a mistake. Under the shade of the canopy, I relaxed on some pine needles with my back against one of the larger trees. With my water and beef jerky for refreshment, I contemplated my situation. It seemed I was out in the wider world. However, I had no way of knowing if this was my world or some further extension of the underworld. If it was indeed my own world, it was nowhere near any place I was familiar with. Heck, there were no forests anything like this within 100 miles of my home in suburban Chicago. As I was having these thoughts, something struck me painfully on the head. The culprit was a pine cone which rolled off beyond my feet. At first I thought it was just unfortunate timing, that is, until another one hit me. Then a third one, and a fourth. That was just too much. I leaped up to survey the treetops in search of the source of my torment. Nothing was immediately visible. Then I saw a dark shape moving among the dark branches. However, I was unable to discern any detail. Having had enough abuse, I turned to climb the rise back to the train tracks, only to discover my way was blocked.